Tiziano Portenier is expecting a baby and so is unable to make it to present the work.
Thank you for the introduction, Yotam. I have to add that Tiziano is actually also getting married on top of expecting a baby, so I think his absence here is justified. So I will give my best in jumping in for him here, and I'll talk about our Face Shop project. So as you will see, this has quite a bit of overlap in terms of the technical underlying ideas from machine learning with Edgar's work that you just saw, but the problem statement is also slightly different. In this project, our goal was to create an intuitive image editing system for facial images. We wanted to build a system that uses simple user input based on sketching and requires little artistic skill. Here you see our user interface, which has two panels, a canvas on the left where the user will sketch, and then a rendering window on the right side where the output will be displayed. So from a user perspective, it looks like this. This is an example of a typical input where the user sketched a few edges and provided some strokes that indicate the desired color. In addition, the user also provides a mask, which indicates the region that will be resynthesized by our system. So based on this input, our system automatically generates the output on the right. I want to show you two short video sequences just to highlight the interactivity of our approach. So you see here how the user starts sketching to modify the shape of the nose. And as long as the user doesn't provide a mask for the region that should be resynthesized, nothing happens. But as soon as the mask is provided, the region is resynthesized on the right, and the user can continue to sketch interactively. So in this second example, the user also changes the hairstyle by providing a simple outline where the hair should be and drawing the mask to resynthesize, and then a few refining sketch strokes to indicate edges to get the final shape of the eyes. So to achieve this functionality, our approach also relies on deep learning with neural networks, as in Edgar's work. Fundamentally here, a neural network learns to perform a task using thousands of examples or training data. Now in our application, we prepare training data that resembles hand-drawn sketches and also corresponding realistic output images. Then we train a neural network to learn the mapping from input-output, from images that resemble human sketches to ground truth photographic images. The trained network can then generalize and perform the same tasks on new data that it hasn't seen during training. And this data, of course, consists then of actual hand-drawn user sketches. So for training, we start with the ground truth image taken from an image database. This image also serves as a desired output example in the training data. But from it, we generate an input example by simulating potential user sketches. And I will talk about this more later. Now, the neural network maps the input to its output. And as you see, the output at an intermediate stage during training here doesn't quite look like the desired ground truth. So to push the network closer to the desired output, a key component of the system is the loss function. So this quantifies the mismatch between the current output and the desired ground truth. And during training, the loss is minimized over all training images from the image database by adjusting the neural network parameters using gradient descent. Now, a weakness of this approach is that the common simple per pixel loss functions like L1 or L2 distances, they lead to artifacts such as blur when you train with those. Now, the deep learning community has achieved some remarkable breakthroughs to overcome the weaknesses of such simple per pixel loss functions. And just as a little refresher, in case you forgot what Edgar mentioned about GANs, I'm going to repeat and give you a short take again on GANs because they're really quite important for generative modeling in deep learning. So this is work that originally appeared in 2014 by Goodfellow and colleagues. And it's a technique that fundamentally can learn to generate samples of any given data distribution. So for example, given an image database such as MNIST, digits here, or the Yale face dataset, GANs can learn to generate new images that look just like images in the database. Interestingly, there is no pixel-wise loss involved to achieve this. Instead, GANs leverage two competing networks, a generator and a discriminator network. Now, the generator simply maps a random vector into a synthesized image, which I call a fake image here, that is supposed to look just like an image in the training data set. So to achieve this, on the other hand, the discriminator takes either a fake or a real image from the training database as an input, and it then tries to determine if that input is indeed a real image or not. So it spits out something like a probability that the input is real. So depending on the GAN flavor, this can actually be interpreted as a probability, but in some other GAN flavors, it's not really the probability, but the intuition is still useful. Now, the generator and discriminator are trained simultaneously by competing against each other. So the generator tries to maximize the probability that the discriminator classifies its fake inputs as real. So it tries to fool the discriminator, whereas the discriminator tries to classify correctly. So it tries to minimize the probability to classify fake inputs as real and maximize the probability to classify real inputs as real. Now, early GAN architectures were actually quite limited in the resolution and complexity of the image distributions they could learn, but there has been a torrent of improvements over the last couple of years. For example, a recent approach by Karas and colleagues, which was published this year at iClear, achieves photorealistic face image synthesis at megapixel resolutions. However, their approach is a purely generative model, and it simply maps a random vector into an image without enabling any user control. Now, an important extension of the original GAN model are conditional GANs, which learn to sample from a conditional distribution. This condition can be by an image that is provided as an additional input to both the generator and the discriminator. And this enables so-called image-to-image translation networks. For example, given a semantic label map as a condition, the conditional GAN generates a photographic image that corresponds to that label map. Isola and colleagues demonstrate many examples of interesting image-to-image translation applications, including also sketch-to-image translation. However, this approach does not facilitate local image editing. Conditional GANs have also been applied to address the image completion problem. In their SIGGRAPH paper last year, Izuka and colleagues proposed an innovative two-scale discriminator to achieve high-quality outputs. While image completion involves local image modifications, users have no control over how to complete missing regions. Now, in contrast to these previous works, our main contribution is an end-to-end trained system that enables contextually coherent, high-quality, and high-resolution image editing on facial images. We achieve this by combining concepts from image completion and image translation. Our system includes a stable network architecture and training procedure that leads to a simple training schedule. We also develop a technique to generate suitable training sketches from an image database and an intuitive sketch-based interface that supports an iterative and interactive workflow. Now, let me focus on a few key technical details of our approach. Our generated input data that we use for training consists of the following elements. We provide a mask that indicates the editing region and a masked corresponding image, sketch strokes to indicate edges, color strokes to control color, and also a noise pattern. And I'll explain these elements in some more detail next. So for training, we found that using rectangular masks with random size and orientation is sufficient. Also, users will, in practice, rarely use rectangular masks. This approach generalizes well to arbitrary masks. We found, however, that using random orientations is important. You see here in the second column that if we train only with axis-aligned masks, then we typically get boundary artifacts if we try to work on images with user-defined arbitrary masks. But including random rotations in the training data solves this problem, and we can generalize to arbitrary user-defined masks. The most important part of our training data are the sketch strokes. The goal here is to automatically generate sketch strokes that are qualitatively similar to a potential human input. we started experimenting with the state-of-the-art HED edge detector, which stands for holistically nested edge detector. And as you can see here, HED extracts edges that are qualitatively quite similar to human sketches. However, we found that HED does not generalize well to hand-drawn sketches. So here the third image shows a hand-drawn input sketch, and the generated result, based on training with HED on the right, exhibits clear artifacts. So intuitively, HED edges are too correlated with actual image edges. So the network does not generalize well to less precise user input, where sometimes edges are missing or drawn inaccurately. So to address this issue, we introduced a post-processing step of these HED edges where we fit splines to those edges, smooth them, and also remove short edges below a threshold. And an example of the resulting simulated sketch strokes is shown on the right here. Now, this approach introduces a certain level of abstraction and approximation, which leads to better generalization to hand-drawn inputs. Here we compare the results of our network trained using the raw HED edges in the middle and using our sketch strokes on the right. And you can see that this leads to a clear improvement in the zoomed-in area around the eye here. For the color strokes, we use a very simple scheme based on bilateral filtering. We also use semantic maps to obtain a rough color map for each semantic part, like eyes and lips. And then we generate random strokes and sample the color covered by these strokes. In addition, we use the semantic segmentation to respect the semantic boundaries when generating these strokes. So this input is then stacked into multiple channels and fed as the input into the generator network. And this produces an output. Our generator network architecture is inspired by recent image-to-image translation approaches, and it contains the typical types of layers, including convolutional layers in blue here, dilated convolutional layers in green, pixel-wise normalization, and also skip connections, which are the dotted vertical lines. So in general, the precise network architecture can actually be quite crucial to obtain stable training and high-quality results, and you find all the details in the paper. In particular, we found that the normalization layers play a significant role. So note that the normalization here is absent in the last 5 layers of the network, and this was crucial to achieve realistic results, so give enough degrees of freedom to the network while still leading to stable training. The discriminator consists of 2 networks, and this is highly inspired by Izuka and colleagues' work from last year's SIGGRAPH, where a global one receives the entire 512 square image, and a local one receives a 256 square crop around the edited region. The outputs of these 2 networks are then combined into a single value, which is called D here, and intuitively this indicates this probability that the input to the discriminator is real and not synthesized by the generator. Since the publication of the original GAN paper, researchers have noticed that GANs can be quite hard to train because they require a delicate balance between the generator and discriminator that need to make progress in tandem. In our work, we obtained the most robust training results using the improved Wasserstein GANs proposed by Gulrajani. In this method, we minimize the generator loss that consists of the following components. First, the loss tries to maximize the value of the discriminator, which means that it tries to fool it to classify the generated image as real. And in addition, it also has an L1 loss to stay close to the ground truth image or to the condition in our conditional GAN. The discriminator loss is designed to first classify the image correctly into fake or real, which means minimize its output for fake inputs, maximize it for real inputs. In addition, the discriminator includes a regularization term and a gradient penalty. And for the details of this, refer to the paper by Gulrajani that explains in detail why this makes sense from a theoretical perspective also. Now, our architecture and loss function, they allow us to train directly on the 512 square images end-to-end without any parameter adjustments. We use a variation of gradient descent called ADAM with standard parameters, and in practice, our image resolution is limited by the available GPU memory, which was 12 gigabytes in our case, and we had 512 square images. With this, I'm ready to show more results of our approach, and these are obtained after 2 weeks of training with a single Titan X GPU. Let me start with another video sequence of an interactive editing session. So here the user starts drawing the mask of the area that should be resynthesized. Notice how the rendering window is updated immediately after each editing step. The user then starts sketching rough edges to adjust the size and the shape of the eyes. Also the eye colors were indicated here, and then some more sketching to raise the eyebrows. And in the end, some final touches, color strokes to apply some makeup, and you obtain a pretty photorealistic result. Here's a gallery with more results to demonstrate the versatility of the system. This includes edits of the nose here, mouth, hair, and eye regions, and another edit of the mouth to introduce a smile at the bottom here, and changing hair and head shape. So these all show that even with very rough sketches, our system produces realistic results that follow the user's intention. Here we also tried it on pictures that we took ourselves, not images from the internet, and you have another edit of the hairstyle here. Another example of a hairstyle edit, editing the nose, and again the mouth region to introduce a smile. In this third example, you see that our system also works well for non-frontal images like this profile picture here. In addition to sketching, our system also provides a copy and paste mode. So here a user copies and pastes parts from other faces. And this obviously leads to artifacts. And a classical approach to get better results would be to use Poisson image editing and remove blending artifacts. So you see an example here, but even with Poisson image editing, you often get subtle problems. If there were edges in the source region that was pasted that shouldn't really be there in the output, or if the user didn't correctly align the pasted region geometrically with the rest of the face. So in our approach, we basically copy and paste the automatically generated sketch of the source region and then resynthesize the target image using our generator. And this avoids the artifacts that appeared in Poisson blending. We also compare here to the image inpainting approach by Izuka and colleagues from last year's SIGGRAPH. And the key difference is that in their method, image completion is completely automatic and does not allow for user control. So in this comparison, we show 2 different results from our system to illustrate how a user can obtain the desired outcome, for example, by changing the hairstyle here. And here is another example, including the synthesis of a mustache, as you see on the right. Now, finally, here's a comparison to image-to-image translation, which could be used as an alternative to our approach. Here, the idea is that we train a sketch-to-image translation network similar to the work by Isola et al., and then the user would just edit the sketch, and we would run the network. However, this solves a global image-to-image translation problem, and it often leads to artifacts, especially in the background areas. So this is even more visible in the second example. An obvious alternative would be is what we call translate to edit, and here we use the sketch-to-image translation approach from before, but we only copy and paste the masked region, and then we do Poisson blending to combine the results. So this works quite well in this top row here. In the bottom row, you see unnatural shading because essentially the image-to-image translation approach is unaware of the context of the rest of the image that is preserved. In our approach, on the right here, you avoid these problems because our approach takes the context into account. We do have some limitations. The first one is that it doesn't generalize well to other resolutions other than the training. And in addition, our approach also requires reasonable user input. So if you draw a mouth in a completely wrong place, or for example, also if you try to synthesize a large region of the face with very little input, you get unpleasant results. So to conclude, I presented a sketch-based face image editing system using deep learning that achieves photorealistic results. I think, there are many, many opportunities for deep learning based generative modeling and graphics. basically including all media types that you can imagine. But all these applications will face challenges, including generating suitable training data and also developing effective user interfaces. And I think these are all very interesting research problems in the future. So with this, I'd like to acknowledge our funding and also refer to our webpage. And in case you have more questions than we can discuss here, please contact Tiziano, who will be more than happy to discuss via email and so on. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. I'll begin with one. So, do small changes in the input lead to small changes in the output? If you were to make a little change to the sketch that you draw, for somebody's nose.
So whether they actually have a predictable effect on the output, that's a very good question, because you have to strike a balance between kind of abstraction. You don't want to fully trust the user sketches, but of course it needs to be tight enough so it's predictable. So this is really controlled by the training data, and I would say our system does a reasonable job, but I think, again, this is maybe one of the downsides of deep learning, because this is simply baked into the system based on the training data. So it might be useful to have systems where you have a slider that allow you to adjust how faithful you want to be to the sketch. And this is not clear, right? It also depends on the user, depending on how confident they are in the sketches and so on. Yeah.
Hi. Good work. So did you do some sort of user study or user testing, evaluation?
It doesn't. We don't have a user study in the paper. Yeah. But it would certainly be interesting to do. It's maybe not quite clear what the comparison points would be at this point. But I think in the future, for all this type of work, user studies are important to understand differences between different systems that have been proposed.
Okay, no. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Hello. I was just wondering how you can control like hair density, like with the mustache, when you drew in the mustache. What do you do to make it a thicker mustache from a lighter mustache?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So the edges that we use now, they're mostly strong edges that control the overall shape, but they're not really edges that control subtle detail like texture or shading. And I think our system will need to be extended to be able to control this also. So to some degree, you can achieve this, but it's really not necessarily designed for this. The training data is not designed for this. So this is an interesting further step to make systems like this more versatile and allow more detailed user control. Yeah.
Thank you very much.